Hello, my fellow readers. My name is Greg, and this is Ghost Readers in the Sky. And I'm here with my reading roundup for the second week of August, 2025. I'll start with what I have been reading, what I'm in the middle of, that I haven't finished yet. And I'm going to start with the poetry of T.S. Eliot. I'm part of a group read. Last week we read The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. This week and next week we're reading The Wasteland, and we'll finish up with Old Possum's Book of Practical Cats and 4 quartets. So I've read The Wasteland now a few times. I've been listening to some recordings. I have some thoughts, but I'm going to wait and tell you more about what I think of The Wasteland next week after we've concluded our group discussion. The other work I'm continuing to go through is Waverley, novel by Walter Scott, published in 1814, a historical fiction novel about the Second Jacobite Rebellion, and I am thoroughly enjoying it. I'm about 2/3 of the way through, probably somewhere right in there. So I had to finish that up next week. And then the one thing I finished this week, I finished the short story called The Sandman, written by E.T.A. Hoffmann, Ernst Theodor Amadeus Hoffmann. He was born in Germany, lived his whole life in Germany. Born in 1776. And he was a writer, he was a painter, he was a composer, he was a jurist, he was in many ways a Renaissance man, a polymath, had a lot of talent and skills that he used through his life. Wrote a series of short stories. So he wrote this in 1816, that's when it was published. Then it was collected in a collection of short stories called The Night Pieces in English. I'm using all the English names because I read this in translation, since all the German that I know I learned from watching Hogan's Heroes as a kid. This short story, The Sandman, was published in 1816, so just a few years before Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein. It does have that mad scientist vibe. Definitely has the gothic and the horror vibes. There's also a little bit of proto-science fiction involved. I would compare it to Edgar Allan Poe. That's who he reminds me of most. But it's definitely his own spin, and it's fairly early in the 19th century. And I think he was doing some pretty interesting experimentation. I should have mentioned earlier, but I'll just throw it in now. He wrote the story, The Nutcracker and the Mouse King, which is the story that Tchaikovsky, Peter Ilyich Tchaikovsky, based his ballet, The Nutcracker, on. So that's, a lot of people know him from that. He was also a well-known composer. You don't hear his music performed a lot these days, but you can find recordings. There are a handful on YouTube, but certainly if you go out to the various streaming services, if you look at a catalog from a large classical music company like Naxos, you will find Hoffmann. And you can see some of his paintings as well. His self-portrait is on the front page of his Wikipedia article. He also did some illustrations for some of his own short stories, compilations. All right, getting back to The Sandman. It's easy to spoil a short story. This is a longer short story, but it's still a short story. And so you can't get too far into the plot before spoilers abound. Basically, our hero, Nathaniel. He's a young boy. His father works all day, but at 7 o'clock, the whole family gathers for dinner. Afterward, they go up to his father's room, the whole family, and they read, they listen to stories told by their father. They just have an enjoyable time as a family. But every once in a while, when it gets toward 9 o'clock, their mother ushers all the kids into bed and says, "You need to get to bed now, the Sandman is coming." And Nathaniel thinks he can hear the Sandman coming up the stairs. And he's quite scared of this Sandman. So one day he finds a way to hide, and he sneaks in and stands behind a curtain, and he sees the Sandman come into the room with his father. And that's all I'm going to tell you, because that's what really kicks off the action of the story. There is a lot of action, but yeah, we follow Nathaniel through his life and through his various encounters with the Sandman. Like I said, there's some mad scientist work involved. There is some early science fiction, kind of proto-science fiction, and there is certainly gothic horror involved. I'd never read any E.T.A. Hoffmann, and I'm glad I read this. And there are a lot of particularly short stories that he's written, and I will have to find ways to dig into a few more of those. And that was it. That's the only thing I finished this week, although I read a lot of Waverley, and I certainly spent a lot of time with T.S. Eliot's poetry. And so it was, I call it a really good reading week, even though the number of completed works is small. That's not what I'm going for. I have already read past the goal I had set for myself for 2025, and it's still August. And I've already met my goal for number of books to read. So now it's just reading to enjoy myself. And that's how the rest of August is going to go. I don't have any plans to do any events beyond the T.S. Eliot poetry group read. But right now, no big plans for the rest of August or for September, except read what I feel like reading. And that's why I'm reading things like Walter Scott, historical fiction, and gothic horror short stories by E.T.A. Hoffmann. And who knows exactly where it's going next. I got a short stack like this big of things that I might read next, but I haven't decided. Thanks a lot for joining me this week for this roundup. And until next time, my name is Greg, and this is Ghost Readers in the Sky.